We are live. Welcome, everybody.
Hey.
Comic Book Conservation Live Show, episode 11. Happy Sunday. How you doing, Phil?
Rocking out right now just for a second.
My daughter and her friend did a pretty great job with that, didn't they?
I like that. I like that a lot.
Normal caveats apply. They told me to make sure everybody knows it's still just a rough cut. Final
I'm very impressed.
Version coming. How was your week?
Very good, very good. I've got a little bit more sun than getting outside.
Oh yeah. I have been too. It's the spring. I have a lot of chores. I have like a little bit of land to manage. When I say that, I imagine like people remember when George H.W. Bush would they would interview him cutting brush on the property in Texas and burning it,
Yep.
you know?
Yep.
got a little brush to clear.
I love that.
Yeah,
Awesome.
but the truth is I have a little bit of land and there's a lot of chores in the spring, so I get out quite a bit myself. So
There he is.
Larry,
Here
welcome.
Hey guys.
How are you?
Howdy.
Good.
We're here. We're live. We're ready to go.
Okay.
Phil, as always, representing Phantom Restoration and the Big Apple. He's already said hi to the people.
Hey, everybody.
Hey everybody.
I'm Dr. Paul from Liberty Hill Comics, coming at you from an undisclosed location in the Texas Hill Country. And Captain Larry, Flying L Comics. Where are you joining us from this week? Looks like home.
I'm at home.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm at
nice.
home for
2
a
weeks
change.
in a row.
Yeah, I know. I escaped. My daughter graduated high school yesterday.
Congratulations.
And so, thank you. That's the last
Mine is
one.
next weekend. Yeah.
Yeah, last one.
Same here. Yeah. Well, we've got a great show today. We've got a show focused on one issue of a comic, Detective Comics number 168. We're going to get into it in a minute. And we have 3 segments on it that we've cooked up, Phil and I. Captain Larry hasn't seen them.
No.
So it should be fun.
Surprise.
Seeing them for the first time. Say hello to everybody in the chat. My buddy Hugo Danner's here. Hello, Starman, Peter, Ben, Don, Shelby, all the regulars. Thanks for joining us.
Larry, can I just say I've noticed the books behind you, they're kind of changed, and that one Mad that's just behind you. I love that. I love that Kurtzman cover so much. It's so terrific.
Yeah, that one was an interesting project. That was it was shredded. I mean, it was little teeny pieces. That was a cover put back together.
Oh, nice.
It was probably in about 20 pieces.
Wow.
I did a video on it. It was a
I'll
project.
have to watch that.
Yeah, it came out nice. It's a bit washed out. I'm not going to turn it in because it's not going to pull anything, but it was just one of those fun projects.
Nice.
Yeah.
Before we get into the main event here, I did want to just point out to everybody, if our live show is not enough comic book conservation content for you in a week, join us over on the Facebook page. Very quickly growing group, very supportive, collaborative. Many of the folks in the chat are there every week, commenting, giving each other a hand and moral support sometimes as we struggle with our with our chemistry and our conservation projects. Thank you, everybody, for actively participating there. We really appreciate it. And I think without any further ado, we should just jump into what we got cooking for everybody today. So, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about this book right here, Detective Comics 168. I'm going to kick us off with our regular What Are Restored Comic Books Worth segment. And then our middle segment is going to be Phil going through an actual project that he did for, as it turns out, this exact book that I'm showing you here. And then we're going to close with another segment on the work that he did with the results and what the fair market value, what equity was created or lost. A little bit of a mystery. We'll leave it up to the end, and we'll talk about the work and, again, what it does for either the equity today or the potential equity in the future. So let's jump into it.
Yeah.
This is a sweet book. Detective Comics 168. It's the first appearance of the Red Hood. First origin of the Joker. It's February 1951, so toward the end of the Golden Age. Golden Age is winding down by this time. Median grade 4.5 on 155 universal copies in the census. One signature? Anybody want to speculate or happen to know who that is?
Kane. I don't
Jerry
know.
Robinson? I don't know.
Jerry Robinson would be my guess for sure.
That would be my best guess.
Yeah. 40 restored copies, 2 qualified, 2 conserved. And why is this book a big deal? The Red Hood character, I think this book has really come on strong in the last really 2 or 3 years, but I'd say 5 years.
Yeah,
in part because this Red Hood persona, which originally was a little bit of a throwaway persona here as the origin of the Joker, but got revived for the Jason Todd character.
Yeah, that's
it's really just driven a surge in interest in this book, and we're going to talk about it. But this is the snapshot of fair market value for this book, and there's a few anomaly type sales here and there, but it's consistently selling for $3,000 a point. Now, it sells for actually a little bit higher than that at the low end, and it sells for a lot higher than that at the high end. But in the middle, from about a 2.0 to a 5.0, in that range, it's fairly linear.
Looking at the recent sales, though, it's solid for certain.
Yeah.
There are some, like I said, there's some anomalies. There was a 0.5 restored that just sold for $5,000 recently.
0.5
restored. Now,
for $5,000.
The restoration, I think, was very easily removed, and I think the buyer was looking at it as, this is an easy one. It's still going to be a 0.5, universal.
Sure.
So they essentially paid, but they're still going to have to pay to have it graded, right? So there's some risk there. But yeah, a 0.5 restored recently sold for $5,000. So there's a lot of interest in this book, and there's been a couple, I think, a couple of sort of FOMO sales because of the surge in interest in this book.
Can I ask you a quick question, Paul? Just because you mentioned something about Jason Todd, is that like 90s story? Forgive my ignorance.
Jason Todd was.
It was the Jim Lee revival story.
Oh, so like early 2000s.
Hush. It was part of Hush.
2000.
Yeah,
it was 2000.
It was the conclusion of Hush, and even then that was a little bit of
that
like
was 2001.
Even then that was a little bit of a throwaway storyline, and then. But recently, that Jason Todd Red Hood persona has been used across a whole bunch of media, including animated stuff, video games, a bunch of other, and ongoing stories.
My one thing, because I never realized that other thing, I only associated this with the Killing Joke and Alan Moore taking this origin and elaborating. That's where a lot of people may recognize this from, is from that. Short 46 page.
Yeah, but I don't think like this book
that was almost kind of throwaway too. It was just
and that's the thing. Yeah, and he made mention of the Red Hood gang, right?
Yeah.
And so it was kind of an Easter egg for people that knew about this book. But 10 years ago, this book was like a $300 book in low grade.
Yeah, exactly.
It really was. It has taken off a lot. It has appreciated a lot more than other similar books of the era. And so my sort of way to rationalize that is it has to be one of the things we know is that when comic books return to a character and when they consistently return to a character, it continues to drive interest in first appearances. And I think the consistent use of the Red Hood for Jason Todd is what is really been the thing that's changed in the last 5 years to make the interest in this book surge. As far as I can tell, not being an owner or a huge, aficionado of this character or the book, but that's just my belief.
The Joker character in general too. I mean, people have always gone after origin issues
and tying it in. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
it's a hot book. Very desirable.
I pulled the last 2/3 of the story, last 2/3 of a page of the story here just for some context of the Red Hood and the Joker's origin. So like I said, about $3,000 a point in these middle grades, a little higher than that on the low end and a lot higher than that on the high end. But what we're going to talk about today is a book that came to you in 3.0 restored. So we're going to look at 3.0 Universal first. And 3.0 Universal has a fair market value right around $8,000. I would actually say maybe as high as $8,500. There has not been a recent sale of a 3.0 Universal. So this is Go Collect's algorithm placing it at about $8,000. I'll tell you why I put it at about $8,500. Here's a 3.5 Universal that sold. This is the most recent sale near our book of interest. And this particular copy, off-white pages, which is really good page quality for this book. But look at the grader's notes. 3.5, you expect a lot of defects, but paint drops, right center front cover. You can see all those white drips over there on Robin. That's paint. Peace out.
It was used as a drop cloth.
It was literally used as a drop cloth. Someone's painting the ceiling was like, hey, get that comic out of here. Shuffled it along with their foot as they kept going. Reader's crease front cover, stain left bottom whole book, tears, creases full right of front cover, vertical crease bottom of front cover, large stain full right front cover. A book with a lot of defects, but still intact. And so appropriately graded a 3.5. Sold for over $10,000 in about 6 months ago, I guess now. So this was the most recent sale around the grade that we're looking for in Universal and trying to establish the value of a Universal. The other thing that I like to do is I like to say, well, are there books available now in the marketplace in this grade? So this book here is offered right now on eBay for $9,000. And it's been there for a little while without any takers. So I think it's fair to say that's probably a little bit above fair market value since it's sitting there without a buyer. So I think the fair market value is somewhere between the $8,000 and the $9,000 here. Personally, I think this is very close. It's probably going to sell for this price or close to it. So I put the fair market value at about $8,500 for estimation purposes of a 3.0 Universal. Now let's look at this book. So this is a book that came to you, Phil, through a client.
Correct. Yep.
And
that one presents better.
Yeah, it does. It presents pretty well, but it's got a major problem. One of them being that it's in a restored label here. Yeah. We're going to get a lot more into that. But for the moment, just to establish kind of fair market value, it's cream to off-white pages. And restoration includes cover reattached with glue. And this is similar to the project book you talked about last week, Phil, in that this was something that was done where the interior was just glue all up and down the spine and then put back together. And that was what it was sometimes done in the past, right? So grader's notes include cover reattached with glue, cover tanning, moderate creasing to cover, and tears to cover. So this needs a lot of work to bring it to a universal label, and put a pin in that. We're going to talk about that in segment 2, but for the purposes of kind of figuring out fair market value, this book sold to your customer December of 2023 for $6,300. So that's as good as it gets for us in terms of fair market value for a book.
That's a lot of money for purple,
isn't it?
And I mean, that's the declared value that was set when he sent it to me too. So no secrets. It is very straightforward.
And we talked about it's about $3,000 per point in Universal. So I put the Universal value, as I said, at 8,500. The restored at 6,300 means it's almost exactly 3/4 of the value of Universal. And I think that reflects the fact that there is quite a bit of work here in terms of restoration removal. This is not for the faint of heart. And while it's doable, this is not a book where someone would glance at it in its current state in the restored 3.0 and say, well, there's money left on the table. So I think this was all the money. 75% of the Universal value really was all the money for this book in its current state without some kind of work or some kind of equity being created. So my conclusion was the appreciation on this book has really outpaced the market appreciation for books, similar books from this era in the last, I would say 5 years, but really even in the last 2 or 3 years, this book has just taken off. It's a blue chip collectible key now, especially now that the Red Hood is established long-term in the Batman mythos and in Gotham and active in current comics and other media. And so there's a lot of demand and a very limited supply. We looked at, I think it's fewer than 200 copies total across all labels for this book. For a book that's this in demand, the Red Hood has has a huge fan base. And a book that only has 200 copies for all of us to go around is always going to be something in high demand. So that's sort of that's my segment, sort of establishing fair market value for this book as it sort of came to you. And Starman says it was Judd Winnick with Under the Red Hood 2005. That was that's an animated feature, if I'm not mistaken. Judd Winnick, by the way, I think is also a U of M grad, my alma mater, if I'm not mistaken.
Very cool.
Fun stuff. Thanks, David. Anything else that we want to say about this fair market value in this book?
I mean, in my opinion, I wouldn't say this book's undervalued because that's kind of a brash statement. But I would say that it's easily it was overlooked for up until the last decade, and this book has been around for 70 years. That's a long period of time, and considering it's the origin of easily, I don't think you can even argue it's the most popular villain. The Joker is the most popular comic book villain. So 200 copies graded of the origin of the most popular villain. That's not many copies at all. And then you have the Red Hood identity that's established, as you said, Paul. It's you got Joker fans and Red Hood fans. It's I see nothing but I hate the whole rocket ship to the moon thing, but really this is a book that it's not going to just drop suddenly. There's quite a lot
I mean, that's why I concluded with a blue chip statement on it. It really is. I think the other interesting thing about it to me is, in the Golden Age, not a lot of villains were repeat villains, right? So Joker's first appearance is in Batman #1, 1940, and you don't have his origin until 1951, 11 years later. Actually, his first appearance is at the beginning of the Golden Age. His origin isn't until essentially the end of the Golden Age. Lots of appearances and covers in between, especially in relation to a Golden Age villain. Batman's Rogues Gallery was reused, I think, more than a lot of other superheroes from the Golden Age were. Like Solomon Grundy is traditionally a Green Lantern, antagonist, but he has only 4 appearances in the entire Golden Age, only 2 cover appearances, right? So it's really unique to get such a popular antagonist and somebody who's went that long without their origin. So, when we started collecting comics, you look for first appearance and you look for origin. And that was origins were really sought after. And I don't know if they are quite as much today, but for folks that are true fans, I think they are.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Well, I'm excited to see what you did with this book. I got a little sneak peek, but this is your deck here. And as I said, this book came to you. So this is after you cracked it here, but you're gonna walk us through it. Phil, remind me, can you move the slides, or do I need to do it?
I was about to ask if I can, what would be my...
On the bottom, there... Do you see the content on the bottom?
Yeah, I think I can here.
Give it a try.
Yep. All right, so let me see here. So I'll talk, and then I'll see if I can do the next slide. So,
Yeah.
So, all right, restoration removal. This was the 3.0 restored C1. Let's remember, CGC set is C1. So what I will tell anyone that sends me books or asks me a question about books, when you have a purple label, if it's A, B, or C1, in almost every case, it immediately qualifies for at least being sent in to be cracked and inspected. It's very, very rare that you'll look at a book like that, open it up, and say, this has to be left alone because it's just too extensive.
Remind the people what A, B, and C mean, Phil.
So A is professional level, C is amateur, B is somewhere in the middle, and 1 is the least amount, and then 5 is the most amount. And it's supposed to be based on surface area. As we'll see here, I will lend no opinion. I'll let you make your own opinion. If you think that the amount of glue that they said was on this book qualifies for C1, or maybe, that was a little, nice of them to
the number being anywhere from 1 through 5, 5 being massive, extensive.
Yeah. I wouldn't say area. Well, I'll leave it at that. All right, cool. So I can do next slide. So here we go. So I try to do several pictures of this because, this is a visual thing. It's easier to show than it is to explain. Mm-hmm. So on the left, you can make out where the light hits it, how much that cover's opening. It's not. That's
a lot of glue.
It looks like a half inch of glue, right?
Yeah.
And then on the right, suspicions confirmed. Look at that. You can't see the border on the left. Not good.
I mean,
not good.
Problem solved. It used to have a loose cover. Now look at it.
But so here,
you're welcome.
I will say to give CGC some benefit of the doubt, because there is a nuance to this grading, without having disassembling everything.
Sure.
There's no way to say exactly how much glue is holding it down. So you can make the argument that it's not along the entire surface, it's just dots. There's it can become complicated. So as I proceed, the way that I always approach a book like this, and now this is if you've watched this channel before and you watched the segment on the Planet Comics 1, this is almost essentially the same surgery on a book that I did. And as you'll see, sometimes you get maybe a different outcome. So I remove the staples. You can see there on the bottom left. That's how I always keep my staples organized. I give a little note of the book, and then a T and a B for top and bottom, with the orientation always in the same direction as how it was. Yep. So the picture here, we have the interior minus the first wrap that's still attached to the cover, separated from the book. So now I can put that aside and just take a look at the cover attached to the first wrap.
Yep. And if you go back, is this some rust migration? It certainly looks like it by the top staple, but what is it along the bottom?
Yeah, that's also rust migration. I was looking at the story of the book. The staples probably got rusty, which caused the cover to detach, and that's why some kid or some adult.
Shelby, we're going to get to the answer to your question in 2 more slides.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead.
So, all right. So, as it goes, sometimes I still always try to approach something like this try not to pass the point of no return. Like, if I can get this book back together, sometimes that is a success. If I start this and I say this is not going as planned at all. So if you look at the picture on the left and you go back and you can compare it to the original photo of the book, you can see on the very bottom there's already a split, and then there's several splits going up so that was where I was attempting to try to get in there and start separating, and it wasn't really going as planned at all. So on the right you see the picture of the back cover, and also bear in mind there was a natural split of the spine too. So I think the staples got rusty, the book also sustained up more wear, and the spine looked like it was essentially totally split too on this copy. So I was trying to remove the glue and start where that split was from the back cover.
Wow.
And I think it was at this point, actually, if you look at the top left too, you can see where the DC logo is. The paper isn't split all the way to the left. That's how much it was. Just there was so much glue right there. That's where the split started. So I think at this point I stopped and I reached back out to the client. And I'd already reached out several times, and I was like, look, I think that it might be best to leave this alone unless you want to leaf cast the book. Like that way we don't have to worry so much about some paper loss on the interior wrap, and I can just focus on just salvaging the cover. So at this point I reached out to the client, and he understood the risk, but said he wanted the blue label and to go for it. So at this point,
for those uninitiated, the leaf casting would result in a conserved label, whereas removal of the rest of the glue, which is the restoration here, will result in a universal label if done properly.
Yes.
And that was his end goal.
Yeah. So you'll see later in some of the photos, but I'll just put a pin in that and bring up leaf casting.
Super exciting. Look at this beautiful book.
Okay. So
the cover still
the first thing. So this is the splash page and the last page, the full first wrap. So I had to kind of psych this out. I had to say, all right, I got to turn this the best blue label that I can, and basically prep the book to be leaf casted in the future is the way that I viewed this. So the best way to
for Shelby's question here, this is just an example of the beautiful script handwriting, cursive handwriting that people used to have. This is just the owner who purchased the book and put the date in it. Yeah.
Yep. 1951.
Yeah. So it's nothing more than that. It's not the signature of a creator or anything. It's just literally the owner's signature. Yeah.
Yeah. He probably did that for all of his books in his collection. So if something happened, he's like, hey, that's my copy.
Right.
So I had to, there was no kind of way around it. I had to remove the both of the interior pages from the cover and keep as much paper intact on these as I could, knowing that the rest that's stuck is going to be lost.
Yeah.
So,
but you have to keep the cover.
You have to make a decision here. You're either removing,
but it's not really a decision. It has to be the cover. In theory, it's a decision, but in practice, 80% of the grade is in the cover. So
no rational person, I think, would curse this any other way. So
this wrap is sacrificial so that you can preserve the cover in this instance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So once that's separated, you can see it's just that whole center of the book that should just be a nice crisp wave of paper is littered with glue and caked in pieces of that interior newsprint.
Wow.
It's just a mess. So
awful.
So then what do you do? Well, I basically flipped the cover around and looked right at where the split was and just took my X-Acto knife and just went all the way down, because you could see where it was already split, and then that saved a little anguish of where do you split it. And then it was just a matter of carefully scraping each side all the way down and removing all the excess glue.
And as we talked about, these covers are quite thick paper. You can basically remove the layers of this paper and still have continuity with the paper underneath because of how thick these golden age covers were and are.
Yeah. Yep. This one wasn't as thick as like the earlier Golden Age ones.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, 51. The
but
books are a bit smaller. Yeah.
That's why I think the Planet comics was something that it was easier to manage, because as we talked about there, it was kind of just removing, there's like many layers to the cover in terms of that. So it was just sacrificing the top layer, where here it really was having to sacrifice it.
Yeah. Thick paper in 1940. By 51, they had driven some of the cost out of comic books so that they could mass produce them more cheaply, right?
Yeah.
Because one interesting thing is, over that 11 years, there was actually a lot of inflation in America. When the GIs came home from World War II, there was actually a surge in inflation. The fact that comic books stayed 10 cents the entire time partly was accomplished by making the books overall smaller. And although this is actually a 52-page book, if I'm not mistaken.
There's 52.
Whereas early Golden Age were 68 pages and dimensionally a little bit bigger as well.
Yeah. So in this photo here, you can see I basically, had to lay, the first wrap, the first page really, that's now detached and split over the rest of the interior in its spot.
Mm-hmm.
And then it got sent off for grading. And as you can see on the left, because you didn't really see what the front of the cover looked like, I must say I was very happy. There's so many areas of this spine that were very delicate, removing all of the glue and all of the bits of the interior that were still stuck to it. And there were several times as I was working, I was like, this little piece is going to detach. And once it's detached, it's you can put it with it and they'll grade it, but it's still not as desirable. So I was very happy with it looking the way that it does, despite it being what it is. I will
100%. So a couple of thoughts from my perspective. One, bravo CGC. They essentially took a stack, 4 loose pages, and stacked them with the rest of the wraps. Obviously you put the staples back in, so the rest of the wraps were held by the staples, but 4 loose pages that they aligned beautifully with the rest of the saddle-bound, saddle-stitched book, and slabbed them really remarkably well, and it presents incredibly.
I don't hold it against them, but these are old books, and they don't know, hey, there's this little thing here where don't hold the book this way. Sometimes they are handling it carefully, but things happen. And I fully expected things to happen on the spine of this. I wasn't going to be surprised. So I will say I'm happy that it's this way, because theoretically, eventually this book may land with someone who says and sees the potential. And I'm getting this thing leaf casted because it's going to put the book back together, and I'm going to get a bump up to.
So I want to talk about that, but before we move on from that, for the uninitiated, let's talk about the grade here. So once the cover is fully split top to bottom, you are maxed out at 1.8. That's the rule with CGC.
Yep. Correct.
In this specific instance, you have the first wrap also split top to bottom. You also have some missing material. 1.5 means that those 2 defects drove the grade here, and that essentially none of the other defects in the book mattered, because you were maxed out at that regardless of what else was going on with the book. It also means that there are no other major defects that detract more than those 2. And that is why it presents as nicely as it does, right?
It does too.
But to your point regarding the potential for leaf casting, and I don't know if we want to talk about it here in your slides, but I want to know your thoughts. What is the potential for this book, leaf casting, wrap 1 and the cover? I have an idea of what I think where this book could be graded in conserved grade. But what are your thoughts, having seen the book and worked on it, knowing it intimately?
Well, Hold on. Let me put just for a second. I'll put my thoughts aside, Larry. Just if you want to I mean, if you want to stand by, that's fine. But if you have
no, I'm watching.
I'd love to hear your
game.
thoughts on what if you have a thought.
You know me, I like to put stuff back together. Now,
Yeah.
I agree. This is a huge leaf casting candidate. I wish my skill sets were there. Leaf cast put together, it would put it into the 3 range, 3.5, I think, in my opinion, for conserved. That's my guess at it. Would I, if I were the owner?
That's the other question too. And I think that's ultimately the dilemma that the client had, but only for a split second am I going to get my return if it's conserved?
Well, the thing is, if you have it professionally leaf cast, I don't think people realize when we talk about this, to have somebody like Kenny do it, it's not cheap. I mean, you got to add that. It's going to take out of your equity of it. So you would save it for a very expensive, 5-figure book for the most part. But looking at this, I think, I still stand by my 3.5 if it's leaf cast. I don't know. What do you think, Paul?
I think I think the potential of this book is just a little bit higher than you think. I think it's 3.5 plus or minus a half grade. Okay. I think if this is leaf casted, it's potentially a 4, because remember the missing material here on the spine is going to come back. And then what real defects does it have? Like, it presents beautifully. That's to me, that's a 4.
It's a sharp copy.
If it goes well, that's a 4. And a 4 universal is going to have a value in excess of $12,000. And even if you put a discount on it for the conserved, you're going to be $9,000 to $10,000, I think, on this book. That's upside. I think that may not be your base case. And certainly, if I were doing it on behalf of somebody else, I would be more conservative. And I would say something like, hey, mentally prepare for a 3, and then anything else is upside. But I think if I'm being completely honest with myself, base case for me on this would be more like 3.5 to 4. And I think that puts the universal, 10, 12 grand. And I think then the discount on the conserved is going to put it somewhere 8 to 9, 10 grand. 8 to 10 grand is, I think, the value on this post conservation if you bite the bullet and invest in the leaf casting. That's where I'm at. What do you think, Phil?
So I get to be the right in the middle guy. The price is right. You said 1,200. You said 11.
Wait, you're gonna be $11,999.
But in all seriousness, no. My gut on this was a 3.5 plus or minus. Conserved, and I think that it's a math equation. If you're a dealer, if this is inventory too, you're trying to get it out of the door. Sometimes you don't want to calculate the risk, and I'm going
to talk about that a little bit in my segment where we wrap up.
So
liquidity matters.
Cost of the leaf casting too. Like, the people that do this generally aren't just doing it right when you send it to them. It gets in their queue, just like when people send me work, it gets in the queue, and I have to
be there months or years.
It can. So, but that said, I think if the owner of this book had, they weren't in any rush, I think, in my opinion, it would be a no-brainer to have this book conserved and leaf cast. And I think that the equity that you're going to derive from it is enough that it easily warrants the cost of the work. And I think that, unless I'm mistaken, I think that there's enough desirability in it that the naysayers that want the universal copy, that's fine. But enough people would say, I'm fine with this conserved. And if it were to go to auction, you would see that in the auction results and go for a healthy price, because people.
Well, as we've demonstrated here, sometimes the conserved or even the restored books can bring more than universal. All you need are the right 2 bidders. And when a book is this rare and this sought after, it happens regularly.
Well,
Yeah,
rarity
Shelby basically
plays
just did the
into
math. That's like quick math, and like the conservation is plus. I mean, honestly, the conservation probably includes the grading cost too.
Right.
So you could say it's 1K, maybe a little bit more, something like that.
Yeah, I'm thinking,
depending
1
on the
to
casting,
1.5. Yeah.
But even still, I mean, you're looking at plus equity, positive equity. So it's just, and it's I think also based on what we were talking about before, 200 copies of this graded book. It's one of those books that, and as time goes on and more copies go into more permanent collections, I think you'll have less of a pick over the copies, and this is one that it's
absolutely.
Yeah,
so
it's a sweet book.
So I think the conclusion for me here is you put it into Universal Label, and well, you know what? Actually, this is probably just a good segue to go into. I think that's your last slide. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the next slide was about the other find book, so we could wait and like throw that.
I just did it. Go ahead. Yeah, let's talk about that, and then we'll come back because I have my last segment is about the equity you actually created and about any potential additional equity, and we can talk more about why somebody would do that. But you have the good fortune of having another copy of this cross your desk very recently. In fact, it might even be on your desk now.
Yeah, I teased this at the end of the show last week.
Let's do this for the
so we've been
viewers,
but
let's
talking
get
about
the correct person up there. Oh, how do I do that? I don't want me. I want. There you go. You did it, and then I undid it. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Phil. There you go. You got it.
So we're talking about this book, actually seeing one in person, and so here it is. And so this was found. Look at that. Look at the reds. Look at the colors in general. And a big part of that is because this was presumably in the attic that it was found in for the majority of its life. And it's got a bit of a spine roll, but the colors overall are incredible. And the craziest thing is from the story, there were, I want to say something like 35 books that were found. In varying conditions. As you would normally suspect, a good amount of them are Classics Illustrated. Yeah. And then there were a few esoteric. The
normal chaff.
Yeah, a few esoteric. So I think I showed the other two that the person that found this gave to me. So there was an Ibis, The Invincible, issue 6, and a Human Torch 31. And then he found this, and it's one of those things where so many of the other books had, burnt edges and pages, brown pages, splitting. If you were to submit them to CGC, slightly brittle or brittle pages. But somehow in that stack, this one survived. And the page quality is a respectable cream to off-white. It's not on white pages, but the
not for an attic,
Yeah, the fact that it's pliable, the book is pliable and workable for me to do a spiral reversal tells you all you need to know about the integrity of the paper.
Beautiful.
That it's fortunate.
And for insurance purposes, where's this one estimated?
This was $16,000.
Yeah,
as a mid grade.
That's a nice attic find.
Yeah,
I had to use my objective reasoning. I basically told him what I think is reasonable as a 5.5 plus or minus. And I said, it could be a 5, it could be a 6. I think a 5.5 is reasonable. So based on previous sales, I thought that was a more than fair declared value and insurance value for it. And not a cheap book, and a very cool.
How fortunate are we, guys?
Yeah.
Shelby says, I have only raccoons in my attic, right? Man, how fortunate are we to get to just be the current caretakers of these books in some instances and get to work on them and improve them and preserve them. Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
The cool thing too about it was he's not a comic book collector, the person that found these at all, but he does like the Joker and character, and it's one of those finds where at least from what he said, he's going to hold on to it for some duration of time because he knows that it's an appreciating asset.
It is, right? That's a blue chip, and he can probably use the proceeds from selling the rest of the books to just cover his conservation and slabbing costs and essentially have be playing with the house's money, as it were, right? Why not?
Yeah.
Why not hold on to it? I had a friend of my dad's who we affectionately called uncle, who wasn't like my blood relative, but he would say, well, you don't have to feed it. Meaning once you own it, it really doesn't cost you anything to keep it, right? Of course, whether or not you insure it, things like that, there can be some incremental costs, but once you own it, not really big costs in maintaining it. So why not, especially if it's appreciating?
I did tell him though that he came to the right guy to do the work, but I also have a pool of clients who are the people that buy books like this. So I told him if he wanted to, and I love working with auction houses, but if he wanted to cut straight to the person, I would be able to find him a buyer in almost no time whatsoever once this gets graded at whatever grade it is. So,
of course. Yeah.
Cool.
Very cool. Mike said he came across a copy of Avengers 3 he thinks I could save. There's a lot of books out there that need work, that's for sure. I'm happy to apply my humble skills to the ones that come my way. So let's move into our last segment, and that is this segment discussing the economics of restoration removal. Is that? Oh, there we go. The color's correct for everybody?
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, that came out right.
And we can talk a bit more at the end about the potential that this 1.5 book has. So this is just going to be a comparison of work that you did before and after, Phil, and then I'll just quickly review what we established the fair market value of the 3.0 restored is. We'll look at the fair market value of the 1.5 universal, and then we'll just revisit that conversation of what additional upside potential it has today. I think it's fair to say at the 3.0 restored, it didn't really have any upside potential. It had to be broken down before it could be built back up.
Yeah.
There wasn't really any meat left on the bone there at 3.0
Now, these are two different books, though.
No.
This is the same. Yep.
The
so
same
that's how on the left it was sent to me, and on the right.
Actually, I used the wrong image.
Two different books. I'm looking
at the
look at the DC.
Oh yeah,
no, you're right. I used the wrong image.
Correct.
I used the wrong image here. Hopefully, I
was going to make a mention that the scans must be different lighting.
That's the same
book.
Well, there is different lighting.
Purple pants.
Yeah, I apologize. Let's see if I put in the actual deck the correct one, and if it was just this thumbnail. There's the correct.
That's
much better.
I'm happy now.
So imaging on the left is by Heritage. Imaging on the right is by CGC. CGC uses this dark background, and they don't have quite as nice a lighting as Heritage.
Yeah.
I did not color correct either of them, and this is the same book. So
CGC
this is the transformation. Yeah. This is they don't use studio lighting. Like Heritage is trying to maximize the return because they're getting a cut of it. CGC is just trying to document it.
But those reds on the caper on like they look on the left, that's the
because you didn't do any wet cleaning or anything else on this
nothing.
book. Yeah. Here's for comparison the back of the two books, and again the transformation that you performed on the book. I put grader's notes side by side just kind of for fun, and obviously we wouldn't expect any change in the paper quality, so we went from 3.0 restored cream to off-white to 1.5 universal cream to off-white. The grader's notes actually decreased in terms of total notes because in the restored copy, cover reattached with glue, cover tanning, moderate creasing to cover, tears to cover. And in the universal, completely split and detached first wrap, completely split and detached cover, pieces out full left of page 1. So at this point, because of the extensive other damage, the creasing doesn't make the cut on the list anymore. And that's part of that's in reference to like what I had commented on, where the split of those two wraps just pegs it at maximum 1.5, and none of the other defects really matter. They don't affect the grade at this point anymore.
Yeah, it could, if there was a lot more creasing to the cover and some pieces,
if they were severe
easily,
enough, if they're severe enough or numerous
no
enough, sure. Yeah. So this is just review. This is what the buyer, your customer, paid for the book. And we established that in this range, it sells for about $3,000 per point. Again, it sells for a bit higher than that at the low end. The last sale for a 1.5 universal was $7,200, but it was actually back in 2020. I think the market has appreciated since then.
No, that was during COVID too.
It was, but in this particular book.
Okay.
When I looked at the other sales on this book, there really hasn't been much of a pullback. So I'm not placing it a lot higher than this, but in my mind, this is kind of a floor for this book, and I think the upside is more like 7,500 or thereabouts
for a copy of the technical grade.
Yeah, and then here is that exact book, and this is the one I accidentally put in the thumbnail. So this is the last 1.5 to sell in a public venue. 2020 for 7,200 Heritage. I think it presents maybe not quite as well as the 1.5. As Larry pointed out, for one thing, the Red Hood's shins here are...
Yeah, the whole bottom part of that cover is just...
The colors are messed up on the
bottom.
Faded colors. Yeah. There's a stack.
Yeah, that was a color fade for sure.
Yeah, nonetheless... Why would somebody do this work? What kind of equity was created? So 6,300 to about 7,500, your restoration removal created somewhere between $1,000 and $1,500 in equity for the owner. Now, the next bullet, some of that was eaten up by your conservation work and the grading costs, but it left a small profit for the owner here. One of the reasons somebody would do this, even without a big profit incentive, is that Blue Label books are way more liquid. You can sell Blue Label books very quickly, especially one this in demand. You just, if you're not looking to set a new record, if you're willing to take fair market value, you can sell these very quickly. Whereas that's not necessarily true for a restored book. To get top dollar, you're probably going to have to consign it to someplace like Heritage and wait half a year and give up 20% of the sale to them. So that's reason enough for somebody to do this work, just to have a liquid asset rather than an illiquid asset. But I think the last bullet here, which we talked about already a little bit in the last segment, is for me the main takeaway. And that is what I alluded to, which is at 3.0 restored, this book was maxed out. It had to be broken down, taken back to 1.5 universal in order to create a potential for the book to then have more equity created. And I think that's exactly what you've done for the owner of this book. The book is now, as we discussed, perfect candidate for further conservation that I think takes this book. So if we look at this as a break even to plus $1,000 in equity, or really, again, after your costs and the cost of the grading,
like
maybe
break
even to $500 in equity created, something like that. Not a lot for the effort and the risk that was taken. But now the book is a baseline for something that is going to be a $10,000 to $12,000 book. And, in universal, and in conserved, it's going to be 8 to 10. And I think that's the real equity that was created here, is in putting the book in a state where it could be conserved further and create a lot more equity for the owner.
It's really interesting too, because I I have some people that reach out to me and ask me questions about books for sale at auction sites. Some of them are big keys, and sometimes they're understandably presuming like, well, the equity on this is probably already maxed out, but I wanted to ask you anyway. And lo and behold, oftentimes, even sometimes in a very big book, there is still equity on the table because it's time and risk, and there's so many different variables going into it, and so many books coming up for sale that if you really know where to look, it's amazing how many times a book can be sold and resold and sold and resold, and equity is created each and every time by someone saying, oh, well, it wasn't pressed this time, or they didn't remove this, or they could have done this too. Yeah. This is a case of that. So.
Yeah. Even just, I'll put a distinction here and I'll say just, but not that it's not in a pejorative way, but people that just do cleaning and pressing and aren't doing any further conservation work, they all approach a book a little bit differently. They all have different things that they see, and they all have different things that they're good at. And there's often pressable defects that are still left on the table, even by highly qualified individuals who create a lot of equity, taking a book from a 4 to a 6, but somebody else can still squeeze out the 6 to 6.5, right? Yep. And that's even without the skill set of a conservator, right?
Yep.
Well, I thought that was very interesting. I appreciate you sharing that process with us, Phil, and creating bookend sort of presentations around the equity before and after. And I just love looking at that book and just comics in general from this era. What a treasure. Yep. Here's a comment that we can talk about a little bit. Ben says,
I was going to mention that one.
Yeah. Why don't you take it, Larry?
Things to look for. Well, a lot of times I'll just look at things that are listed that are purple label. As long as it doesn't say cover was trimmed, to me, that's a candidate. So, because color touch can be removed. You can look at a lot of things if there's sections of it missing. I mean, again, that's leaf casting. That's a different deal. I don't know. You look at my videos, I have a lot of things that are torn in half. Yeah. And I put them back together. So those are always conservation candidates for me personally. Mm-hmm. But I do look at the purple label books that come up for sale because people they have this aversion to that purple label, and rightly so. But yeah, as long as the cover's not trimmed, because I can put anything back together or fix anything except for that. And could it be leaf cast? Sure, but
it's got to be a very valuable book.
It's got to be a pretty valuable book to justify that, and to put things in perspective for people. If you were to go get something leaf casted, you're talking properly do it. It's going to be $1,000 to $1,500, possibly more. It's not a small thing to just go out and do. So you got to weigh that in, unless you can do it yourself. But yeah, I'm learning.
Mm-hmm. I would just add too.
Please.
I always like seeing green label qualified books.
Oh yeah,
I'll go right to it. And as long as it doesn't say missing page, what I'm looking for is cover, back cover, centerfold, married. And I'm like, boom, perfect. I love it.
Yeah, that's me. Yeah, I agree.
It's another 100%. One of those things where the slab is stigmatized to a point where a lot of potential buyers won't even consider the book in its current state. And lo and behold, to do conservation work, you oftentimes will bump the technical grade, and all of a sudden that book is more desirable with the new conserved label. And go figure.
For those that don't know, the green label is a catch-all qualified. And so it can mean anything from an entire page is missing to the staples have been replaced.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right. And so because it's such a catch-all, there is a lot of opportunity there. And that's actually where my Adventure Comics number 61 came to us from.
That's right. That was a qualified book. I forgot.
Qualified label, right? Yeah. And for that same reason. So I'm right with you on the potential of those books. because married pages are forgiven in conservation. So
It's true.
It's going to get a note, it's going to get a mention, but you're going to get that nice conserved label, which is not nearly as jarring as the green label. And well, the conserved label can only be applied to books that have been professionally or conserved with professional techniques and materials. So it gives the buyer a sense that the work was done properly and is not going to further deteriorate the book, right? So I think that's where the confidence comes from. And that's why we see generally conserved books at a certain numeric grade sell higher than the restored books, sell somewhere between the value of the restored and the universal grade on the book. Ben says, could you talk more about married centerfold? So married essentially just means that the centerfold is correct for that book, but was not born with that book, meaning it was taken from a donor book. And that would be the same for any leaf within the book, or sometimes you'll see the back cover. That just married means it is correct for the book, was, came off the same manufacturing line, but was not assembled with the book when it was originally assembled. My answer for this, say again?
It's like, you're a car guy. It's like new old stock parts. It's like
it's similar to new old stock. It's the difference. It's the difference between getting a refurbished original Corvette rim for your 65 Corvette versus a reproduction one that's been stamped with similar numbers and made to look original but isn't.
Yeah, I've got a really awful looking Jetsons #1, gold key, and that's it's awful looking. But there's a green label that these guys want way too much money for, and it's missing the center wrap, and I have the center wrap, and so I tried to buy it from them. They won't budge off the price, and so I'm at ask because I wanted to marry him up.
The two classic green label books in my mind are both 181 issues. So everyone will know the Hulk 181 is often missing the Marvel value stamp.
Correct.
And it's graded in this catch-all category, qualified. So that means it's graded as if the stamp was not missing. That would be the grade if you imagine that the stamp was still there, right? Yeah. The other one is actually Batman 181, first Poison Ivy, and the centerfold is a pinup, and it literally said, "Boys and girls, pop this out of the book and put it up on your bedroom wall," right? And it's very often missing. I actually married a centerfold into one of those books and sent it in, and ended up with a universal label from CGC on that book. Yeah,
they missed that one.
They normally do not miss those, but
so the same production.
I was really happy with it. It's very difficult for those that have not tried it. It is extremely difficult to get that paper lined up perfectly, top left or top right and bottom, to make a married page disappear. But sometimes, the stars align and you get it done. My answer to this question is actually a little more esoteric, and it is practice. Practice yourself. Buy books, crack them, work on them, resub them, and learn for yourself what good candidates are. Or if you're not doing the work yourself, get a relationship with a very skilled cleaner and presser or conservation person. Get a second opinion on books. On that Adventure Comics number 61 that we bought specifically as kind of a fixer-upper and as something we wanted to create some equity in, I had my thoughts on what could be done with it, what potential was there. But I did reach out to Phil before the auction closed, and I said, I have my own opinion, but I'd love to hear your opinion on this book before I say mine. I don't want to muddy the waters here, and see if we're in agreement on it. And in that case, we were. So I would say have some colleagues whose opinion you trust, reach out to them, talk through books. CGC's grader notes are your friend, and then just experience is your number one tool here, because not everybody has the same skills to to create equity. Know what, develop your own skills, know what you're good at, and then practice them. And that'll be your best answer to what are the best things to look for.
Yeah. It's funny, Larry, when you mentioned some of the candidates you were looking at and stuff, and I was doing it in like 2017, 2018, 2019. And I got way too many books I could even work on. And then just when CGC changed their parameters where the piece fills had to be casted, I have like a dozen books with totally split spines, but pieces missing where they got to be casted, that I'm like waiting to get going with casting that I can cast, because I had to like put the whole group aside.
I know.
I've got the same types of books that
I've got leaf casting candidates behind me in boxes, and I'm just like, I gotta get this skill down.
But when you get, and it's especially prevalent in those 50s books where the cover paper is a little thinner, those almost perfectly split spines, and it's like, I can do this that's my goal, traditionally.
I work with a lot of completely split spines, and if I could leaf cast it instead of using Japanese paper, that's what I really want to do.
Yeah, but for the sake of maximizing the technical grade, you don't have to worry so much about leaving some on the table when the split is so nice and clean.
Yeah.
Then it's like when there's a piece missing from the back corner of the cover and other areas, you're like, if I could cast this, I'd get that extra 2. But there's still enough books that can be done just like you're doing, and it's awesome that like those are great candidates.
Well,
really. You don't have to worry about leaf casting.
I got that Adventure Comics 247 I'm currently working on right now. It's got a 1-inch square missing out of the back cover, and that's a leaf cast candidate right there.
Yeah.
But I think when I think of potential for books like that, Larry, I think of that book that you did where every single wrap was split straight down the center, and it was that book was a 1, and you put it back together with just Japanese paper and wheat paste. And what was the grade when you were done?
6.5.
You didn't have to know how to leaf cast to do that.
If you guys out there haven't watched that video series on Flying L Comics, go check out Larry's channel, because
Men's Adventures 25.
To me, that right there is the greatest example we have of how to create equity. Now, that's not a valuable book, but if you were to do if you were to bring
do the work yourself,
Detective 168,
that
where it was a 1.0 with every single page split, and you brought it up to a conserve 6.5, you created $15,000 in equity in that.
Yeah, the Men's Adventures, I think the universal was of 6.5 was at 1,450. And I got it for like when I bought the book, I think I bought it for like $40-50.
Yeah,
that's awesome. That's how much I was paying for all those books with split. I have some weird science and weird fantasy books I got 5 years ago for $20, $40, $30.
Well, yeah,
like these are split. $20 seems fair.
Those EC horror books, I bought each one of those for like $40 when we did a couple of weeks ago, and now the equity, we created hundreds of dollars in equity in it. So
absolutely.
I wanted to just answer
let's address Peter's
real quick.
Yeah, sure. You want to take it?
Yeah. So basically, like if you're seeing a book in a green label, but it has a married piece. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's conservation. Oftentimes it means it's just placed in the place of where it should be.
Or it's taped in, and tape gets a free pass, and just it's universal. I would say more often even than placed in, it's taped in.
Yeah. Very rarely you'll see someone have like disassembled a book to reassemble it with the wrong centerfold and look at it. That's very rare though. Oftentimes it's exactly what Paul said, it's taped in. Yep. Mm-hmm. Or it's just placed. It's just, the cover is detached but placed with a different interior, or just the back cover is placed where it's supposed to be, but it's not actually attached.
Yeah. So, and occasionally you get an interior wrap, like for example, when somebody cuts out the Marvel value stamp, and I know Hugo Danner used to do this a lot. He would get a donor book, maybe with a completely jacked up cover, or even a coverless donor book, and then swap that wrap out so that you have that, you have a copy of Hulk 181 with a really nice cover, but missing Marvel value stamp. You find a coverless copy that has the Marvel value stamp, and you swap that entire wrap out.
Yep.
That would be a married wrap. Yeah. If they catch it.
Yeah.
They will. They're good at it.
Yeah.
They're really
the
good.
The one Batman 181 that I got by them is the only one I'm aware of. I mean, I'm sure there are others, but.
Yeah. All
right. Ben says, are there good Leafcast vids out there? And he says, Phil? There's a lot of great material out there. Obviously, friend of the channel, Jerry the Jitterbug, has put out the most material by volume for sure. But there's a bunch of paper. Well, first, I go to the paper conservation literature, right? The peer-reviewed literature on paper conservation from the librarians and the museum curators. A lot of great information out there. They were the pioneers that started that work. Kenny Sanderson, of course, is the most established, most experienced guy in the comic book world doing that work. He does not have full videos out in terms of, he doesn't have a YouTube channel, but he does have Instagram. You definitely, if you're watching this show, ought to be following him on Instagram. And he does show a lot of before and afters. Yeah. And then there are other videos on YouTube as well. And I would say, you have to dig, because a lot of them are by, again, librarians, paper conservationists, museum curators, and that's where I would look for inspiration.
Yeah. There's many videos on YouTube of just like archives showing how they cast old pages from books, and that's the basic process in a nutshell.
Yeah, and that's where Kenny Sanderson learned from. Kenny Sanderson learned from librarians and museum curators. So that's where the work was pioneered and where it was first described and described in the most detail. So I think they're often not working with newsprint. So I think Kenny Sanderson took a lot of that work to the next level. And I think for newsprint specifically, I don't think anybody's as experienced as him probably in the world, including all those librarians, though I could be wrong, because they're usually working with historical documents that are made of different materials, maybe not pulp paper, maybe linens and, cotton rag paper.
Exactly.
And so those techniques can differ clearly. And then also just the sheer volume of the work. If you're a library conservationist, you probably don't do leaf casting every day or even every week. And somebody like Kenny is doing that every week. So yeah, those are the places to get started. And then just like I said before, start practicing. So it's fun. It's a lot of fun to make paper, actually. You can just start off by making some craft papers and experimenting with them.
Yeah, making paper not having to be attached to an old comic book in and of itself is actually pretty straightforward.
And it's fun.
The complicated nature of doing it as surgery on another piece of paper, though.
Yeah, and you can put all kinds of things in it too, right? You can take flower petals and put them in there, and you can do other wacky stuff, creative stuff, and all of that builds your skills, toward your conservation skills, right? Like those skills transfer to what you're going to do with your comic book conservation. So it's fun. Why don't we wrap there, guys? This has been a great show. It's been our first show focused on a single issue. Shelby says we used old blue jeans to make paper. Absolutely. Old cotton tees. Yeah. Cotton is really the king for paper making. And the best books were published back when we were still using rag paper. And there's fascinating history on, the paper obviously originated in Asia, but the Western paper making tradition is rich and actually took some very weird historical turns. There was a whole bunch of cotton rags and clothes after the Black Plague in Europe that they had to either burn or, they weren't going to be used again. And what ended up happening is all those rags and clothes from all the people that died in the plague and the linens from their beds and everything, because people didn't understand germ theory yet.
Yeah.
Almost all of that got made into paper, and it created a boom in paper availability, and it drove the cost of paper down so low that commoners could afford paper, which hadn't been true, prior to the 14th century. And so there's like this wild, somewhat macabre history to paper making in the Western tradition. And I just find all of it fascinating. So I said to the guys, I'm reading this stuff so you guys don't have to.
Yeah, we appreciate you doing that.
That's a fun fact. I did not know that.
Yeah. That's where there was a boom in the availability of rags right after the plague. And that drove the cost of paper down so cheap that all of a sudden you could print books that everybody could afford. And prior to that, only the rich could afford, and then that, of course, drove a huge interest in literacy. So there was a huge increase in literacy in Europe after that as well. So fascinating, the history of paper. Anyway, like I said, let's wrap there, guys. This has been a great show. Thanks again for joining me. I really enjoyed our first. Yeah. You can say whatever. I really just let me. I really enjoyed our first episode, just focused on one book. That was fun.
Yeah, that was fun.
Again.
Yeah.
Please, Phil, go ahead.
Sorry, I just didn't know if you were going to do a sign off, and I wouldn't have a chance. And I was like, I just wanted to make a mention just before I forget, two things. One, it's interesting to note, like, the same job done on the Planet Comics 1 and this Tech 168. Mm-hmm. You had a best case result for the Planet, really, that a ton of equity was created. The grade of the book and the integrity of the book was much better than this Detective, which was what you could deem a worst case scenario. But still, a takeaway from that, a worst case scenario still had the client breaking even and getting a universal grade.
So really, equity created.
Even in a worst case example, it's
even after covering all costs. Yeah.
Still not so bad, really. And then the other thing I wanted to make note of is this Thursday, I'm going to be making like a quick appearance on Shelby, who is one of the viewers here on our channel here, on his show, The Comic Wrap, at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Thursday.
Ooh, okay, awesome. Shelby, make sure you push that out so we all know.
Eastern. Yeah. I often co-host a show, an FOC top 10 show on Thursday evenings, but it probably overlap a little bit. But once I get off that show, I'll jump into to Shelby's channel. That's great. Yeah. Awesome. Well, again, thanks everyone. We appreciate everybody being here. Thank you to my co-hosts, Phil and Larry. Everybody have a great week and take care of one another.
All right. See you later, everybody.